Welcome. Today's lesson is how to manage soil quality and soil fertility, in particular in school gardens. Really, one of the things you need to understand is just a real basic principle. If you feed the soil, then you're actually feeding the plants. This video is about developing management as well as skills to balance the nutrients inputs and outputs for all the kinds of crops that you'll be growing. Mix this with some good management practices, primarily like soil fertility as well as soil quality. You can start building a program around it. Here in Northern California, this is a high school garden, and we have a class also that helps manage this. So it's also important for students to understand this as well. You mix all of the information and knowledge you have with some great practices such as irrigation, crop tillage, as well as crop rotations. I think you'll be on your way to managing it fairly well. Here at our first station, I just wanted to give you an overview of our garden and kind of what kind of space we're talking about. If you take a look, essentially I have 4 beds on this side and 4 raised beds on this side. Plus, if you go a little further down, here you can see those 2 peeler cores, and those are our vineyard. We got 10 vines. We basically paid for about 4 of them, and we've had 2 others donated, and we're still looking to get some other stuff donated as well. So that's our garden on this end, and then over on the other side is some more row crops. Before this was our garden, which was, we've had this garden about 11 months. So we've actually gone a long way because this was just a neglected piece of ground on the school campus, right in the middle, right up about where you see the 3rd raised bed. There was a really old, kind of decrepit, fruitless mulberry, and then all of the grass that was here was basically weeds and was kind of neglected and was heavily compacted. And of course, using some of the amendments and some of the techniques I'm going to be talking about today, we've been able to kind of turn this piece around. Now, on behind me, there's another piece of ground, pretty much the same amount of soil, which also has some other issues that we're going to be probably gathering and starting to this next class, the year's class is going to take over that one as well. So what does soil quality and fertility actually do for our gardens? These 2 concepts work in unison or together so that it can accept as well as release nutrients. And when it does that cycling of those nutrients, it helps promote superior plant growth as well as root growth, fruit growth, but more importantly, I think, it also establishes a habitat for soil organisms to thrive. And that's the whole thing on our principle. Remember what I said is you feed the soil, you feed the plants. And the techniques I want to show you and some of the things that we're going to get into today has to do with making those 2 concepts work. The soil you actually put in these raised beds is really, really important. This particular mix or this particular blend that we got has a high amount of organic matter. It also has some local topsoil, which is a Myers clay. So it needs to be broken up. So that's one of the reasons we have a lot of the organic matter, but also a lot of sand. So it'll drain a little bit better. This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, soil fertility and soil quality. We're in an orchard where I'm going to show you an example of how we're feeding the soil. We do that by cover cropping. And the cover crop we put on this one is mustard and oats. We wanted to open up the soil because if you remember, I basically said that this happened to be mostly clay soil, and so it didn't drain very well. So obviously we tilled it all up, kind of ripped it up a little bit so that we could break it into smaller pieces. And then of course the oats as well as the mustard was breaking it up, all the soil, so it'll be a little bit more crumbly, so it would soak into the soil, have some greater permeability. And if you look, here is some of the oats, and you can see that it has lots of roots in between it to break up the soil. And of course, we had that irrigated about a couple of days ago, and it's still pretty wet, pretty moist still. And we're doing this on both sides of the vineyard so that we can put some watermelons in until the actual grapes start to grow. So this is one way that we are achieving the fertility as well as the quality of the soil. Well, the vineyard part that we just came from, that's primarily our winter type of cover crops. Things like clovers, things like grasses such as oats, and a variety of other things. And they tend primarily to do two things. One of the things is they open up the soil, so it improves the structure. And then the second thing is it relieves behind some nutrients. Any legume, its main function is to take in nitrogen gas from the atmosphere, so it's N2, and then what it does is it's going to be able to use the nodules in the root system that I'll show you in just a second, and then turn that nitrogen gas basically into nitrates, a kind of food candy for the legumes. So how do these legumes work? Well, as I said, there's some bacteria, special bacteria that live in what they call nodules in the root system of legumes. And if you take a look at these little things out here, little like pea things, those are the nodules. And inside of those nodules are bacteria. Those particular bacteria will convert nitrogen gas into nitrate, which is the food for plants. So, but what do you do like for the summertime? Well, the summertime is a great opportunity to plant beans. And here is what we're doing currently. We're using these black beans not only for our culinary program here at the school, but we're also using them as a cover crop. That cover crop, of course, is going to put back into the soil nitrogen. And that's what we're going to be needing for some of the winter crops like lettuce, and they'll thrive as well. So these particular plants, any kind of legume, beans, veggies, alfalfa, those kind of things, tend to do extremely well in replenishing the nitrogen. So far what we've seen, or what we know about soil fertility, it's really all about the habitat, the ecosystem within the soil. Whereas soil quality is more like the chemistry, like the pH and the amount of nutrients in it. So how do we do that? Well, one way, of course, is cover cropping. Legumes and certain kind of cereal grains also work extremely well improving both of those. But what else can we do in our school garden to improve soil fertility and soil quality? Well, those are amendments, and we're going to be talking about that next. One of the first amendments I want to show you is, of course, our compost. The compost that we get from our garden goes right here to this little pit. We also get food waste from the cafeteria and any kind of other waste that we might produce out in the garden. And it usually works pretty well, but the problem is we haven't kept the balance between brown and green. The brown stuff is the carbon that needs to go into your mix, and then of course the greens are kind of the nitrogen, and then of course making sure that it's also moist and turned on a regular basis, and that's where we've kind of fallen behind. We need to obviously improve on that for next year. However, we're very fortunate in the fact that we have a company, a recycling company here in the county that actually takes wastes, yard wastes and food scraps, and turns it into an awesome compost, and they give it to us for free. So we use this every time that we have a new crop. We'll put a little bit of that on the top, and then when we put in new beds, and I'll show you the beds and everything else so you understand. But this stuff is really good, and let me show you what it's supposed to look like. It's kind of a really nice dark brown. You can see all the organic materials within it, and of course not only does it release important nutrients, but it also helps to maintain water moisture in it as well. It's an extremely rich and very easy to work with kind of amendment, and it really provides a lot of support. Now here's an example of a crop that has benefited greatly from this compost. It's our strawberries. The strawberries are kind of getting near the end of their production at this particular point in time, although they're putting a lot of runners out that we need to cut back, and then we're going to propagate those in the greenhouse and then start over again somewhere else. So this is an example of the kind of lush green kind of growth that we can expect from using that compost. Here's a bed that we just harvested and pulled off all of the winter peas that we had. And again, this one served two reasons: food, and also, of course, a cover crop, because it put a lot of nitrogen in here. Now, what I won't do with this is I'm not going to turn it over. I'm going to leave it as is, and we're just going to put a little bit of a layer of the compost. But also I'm going to put another amendment in that I'll show you in just a second. But this particular bed, we're going to just leave the roots in here, because all those nodules and everything, as it decomposes, will release a lot of the nitrogen. So instead of screwing up some of the habitat for the microorganisms, we're going to leave it like that, moisten it up. And it's still a little bit moist underneath, and if you dig down about an inch or so, it is nice moist soil, and it still maintains its integrity. We'll put some compost over top of this, not very much, and then the second secret ingredient, I'll get to that in a second. We got all of our compost, and I'm just going to kind of spread it out over, nice and smooth. And I've already done a bunch anyway, and then I just take the rake or even the shovel and just move it around so there's an even amount on it. Now, it's going to get all the nutrients it really needs, but what it doesn't have yet is a lot of them, basically some of the macroorganisms, things like earthworms and that kind of stuff. In order to kind of inoculate this bed, we've been working on a vermiculture pile, which means we have a bunch of red wiggler worms. We take a little bit of the food wastes, and of course you may be seeing, what is all of this paper in here for, Jerry? Well, it came from the vermiculture pile. We've put a little bit of, we've inoculated with worms and the compost that the worms made, the vermiculture pile. So let's take a look at that. All right, here's our vermiculture pile. You can see some of the shredded paper that we sprinkled just a little bit on. And then underneath, this is some of the food wastes and other kinds of things that we got from the culinary, as well as the coffee grounds and a variety of other things that we got from our cafeteria. So we don't usually mix too much of our compost into here. What we basically do, we let the worms do what they do the best. Now you can see how it's moist because we keep that thing moist, and if you look at it very, very carefully, you can see a lot of like insects and things running around in there. And let's see if I can pull out. This is about, I don't know, 3-4 weeks old, and you can see that it's light. It's fairly fluffy, but it still is being worked over by the worms, which of course they process it. So you get a lot of worm castings and poop. And here's some worms here, I think. And yeah, there's a red wiggler right there. And there's another one. Yeah, they just dropped off, and more. So it's already starting to multiply. And of course, what we're going to do is we're going to just take some of this, sprinkle it kind of liberally on top, and then moisten it up again so that the worms will start moving down. And they just do their job. They love this paper. Food scraps as well. And I try not to put any clippings of that kind of stuff in it that the yard waste leaves. Right now, I'm sure when school starts coming back, we hope soon, we're gonna have a full bin of worms. So let's go on to the next station. Well, this is my next station. This is another kind of amendment, and it serves a whole different purpose. This right here is good old-fashioned, run-of-the-mill mulch. Mulch is amazing stuff. First and foremost, it's great for weed control. You bury enough of your walkways and things with about 3 to 4 inches of mulch, it's going to take care of it. As a matter of fact, it's also great for moisture control. And it rained about, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, and it didn't rain very much, and look how much moisture this thing can still hold. So it also, because it's holding moisture, it starts to break down. As it breaks down, it also adds, of course, nutrients as well. So you can use it in between beds. You can use it on top of beds. You can use it like I'm using it, like right here for a walkway, and it's a great amendment. And we get that for free too. A lot of the tree trimmers sometimes have to pay, like for instance, when they go to the dump. And so we have a gentleman who dumps all of his waste material, or all this mulch, at our school farm, and we basically get it for free. He's happy because he doesn't have to pay anything for it. We're happy we don't have to pay for it, and we're putting it back to use and kind of recycling it. I better get moving, because not only does it hold a lot of moisture, ants love the stuff. So I got to go in a second. I'll meet you at the next station. Thanks. Our next so-called crop really is, I just kind of like have a, some people might call it a hedgerow. I actually call it a pollinator garden, because what I've done here is take a couple of beds out of production so that we can have an area that basically has plants. They're going to attract beneficial insects, but more importantly, pollinators. I've got sunflowers in here, a variety of different kinds of plants that are native to our area, and a couple that aren't, like this little bitty violet that's right here. But I try to make it kind of so that it's also kind of pleasant to look at. But yeah, that's our pollinator garden that we hope to have kind of in full blast right around July. This is something you may want to consider when you're also setting up your beds, as well as your classes. Lots of opportunity as far as lessons are concerned, especially in the pollinator garden. All right, what I'd like to do is kind of finish up the video on how we manage our beds. Obviously, you kind of saw what we did as far as the raised beds were concerned, but the row crops is a little bit different. When we first started, this soil had, like I said, had been compacted. It was dry. It was really hard because it's a Myers clay. So we had to get in with a tiller. So we went in with a tiller and we got it real nice and fluffy. Then we added some compost to it and then mixed that up. And then what we did is, once we kind of leveled the entire playing field, so to speak, we then came in with the wheelbarrows, about 3 to 4 inches of compost, put it all over the top, kind of formed it into a bed, and then we put drip irrigation in it. And we think, at least after our first harvest, the soil tends to be a lot more pliable and stuff that we can use. We are trying to make these no-till over in the next couple of 3 years, so we'll be able to lead. And again, if you notice, again, it's beans. It's going to be a cover crop as well as a food source. We're going to just cut them off basically right above the roots, and we're just going to let the roots just turn into compost all by themselves. So we're just going to see how that works, and you can see a variety of different other crops that we have that are currently growing. Now, again, when we take a look at the grapes in particular, and I think I alluded it at the beginning of the video, but the vineyard itself, we've just planted, again in the fall, we planted mustard and oats, and we just let it grow up. And then basically what I do is I trim it back with a weed eater, or actually the students do that, and make sure I do that before I actually put all of the drip irrigation in. And then what we do is just let it decompose. And because we're going to be working on training these vines, we're going to be also making sure we prune them and everything else, and we want a workspace right in between. On the outside parts of the bed, I put, what we did is we decided on strawberry. I had a young lady who had to have strawberries, so not only did we get that bed, but also she also did this bed. And then this bed, because there's nothing growing in it right now because the watermelons aren't quite ready. This is a little bit bigger bed, so that's where we're going to put our watermelons. And that's how the first year has gone for us. One of the most important tools that you can arm your students with to be able to manage soil fertility as well as soil quality is one of these test kits, not only for the soil but also for the tissues. These are extremely important. They'll get a lot of use out of these. They're between $50 and $60, and you can get them in a variety of different locations. Amazon plus other garden centers, or anything that's online that has to do with gardens. So today we've talked about the basic principle and goals of gardening. We take a look at some management practices. We've defined not only soil fertility but also soil quality and how they kind of can work together. We've also looked at different soil amendments, some basics, so that you can grow your own food and continue to start with some kind of garden program in schools. I hope this video has helped you at least get started. That was the intent for those of you teachers or administrators or people in the community who want to start a school garden at a high school, a junior high, or elementary school. First thing you ought to do is let's see if they have a farm to fork program, and then second of all, try to identify the resources that you can use. I hope that you can get started and just let me know how you do. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you